Welcome to the Draw Shop's Get Genius podcast, where we talk to today's business influencers to pick their brain and pull out their genius. It's time to get genius.
Hello, listeners. So today's episode is definitely different than most that I do. I will warn you right now, it's going to be pretty raw. It's very honest. There's lots of opinions in here, and it's really actually awesome. So I'm excited for you to hear it. Who is my guest? My guest is Tucker Max, and Tucker Max is the co-founder of Book in a Box, which is a company that's created a new way to turn ideas into books, like in such a very streamlined way. It's really awesome. I super appreciate the process that that Book in a Box takes you through if you are wanting to be an author. So that's a big topic of our conversation. We're also talking Hollywood. We're getting a little raunchy. And it makes sense because if you know who Tucker Max is, you know that he is the creator, the guy behind I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. If you remember that movie back, I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago or so. He has written 3 number 1 New York Times bestsellers. They've sold over 3 million copies worldwide, and he's credited with being the originator of the literary genre fratire, and is the only third writer after Malcolm Gladwell and Michael Lewis to ever have 3 books on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list at one time. So I'd say he's pretty credible at starting a company called Book in a Box, although it's kind of interesting how the company started, and you'll hear that, and I think a lot of us can relate to it when you think of your businesses. I'm starting to hear that a lot, how it's just one kind of circumstance, conversation or something that happens that just kind of like spews off this whole entire idea, and then boom, this business with massive growth happens. It's pretty cool. So Tucker is, he's pretty funny. You're definitely going to be entertained. And I don't know what else to say because you just got to listen. And if you have any feedback for me, I'd love to hear it. Enjoy the interview. Hello, Tucker. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Of course, my pleasure.
So lots of fun stuff to talk about with you. You have a pretty interesting background. So I know we're going to talk about all the cool stuff that you're doing today, but I'd love if you could talk about what brought you to today. Give me 2 crazy adventures.
I mean, like, how do I sum up 42 years? Like what areas do you want me to focus on?
Okay. Let's start with you 10 years ago. What were you doing 10 years ago?
So 10 years ago, I was 32. It would have been 2007. So that was right when I started. I had my first bestseller was out on the market. I Hope They Serve Beer in Hell. And I was in Hollywood in the process of getting the movie about that book made, which ended up coming out in September of 2009.
Yes. I remember that movie very, very well, and the book. So how did you, what started that book?
Honestly, it was emails to my friends. When I was, I graduated from law school, and then I got fired from my first job as a lawyer in 3 weeks, and then my dad fired me from the family business.
Oh.
And yeah, I know. And so I wasn't very good at the 2 things that I had studied for, but I was pretty good at law and business, at writing. And I, not even that I recognized that, but it was my friends who were I was sending my friends emails about all the kind of ridiculous, drunken, nonsense I was doing. The same stuff everyone does in their 20s, except I kind of took it a little bit further, and then I wrote it all down in emails. And so they were like, look, man, this stuff's really funny. You should, publish this stuff. And so I tried to get a book deal, and that was in 2002. And not only no one wanted to publish. I mean, I sent queries to every agent, every publisher, and everyone was like, no, go away. This is terrible. We hate you. Like literally every single one. And so I put my stuff up on the internet for free, which at the time like was not a thing. Like that was like GeoCities was still around. I think I used a GeoCities site, and people were like, the internet was like the place where like creepy strangers hung out. Like, and now of course, 15 years later, you use the internet to like summon strangers, and then you get in their car from it. But anyway, so I put my site up, and it kind of blew up, and so it kind of became this big thing, and then got a publishing deal, and now 3 #1 New York Times bestsellers later, and a movie and all that sort of stuff. That whole thing kind of peaked around 2011, 2012, I think.
So how did the whole movie process go? Like, how did it? Who did somebody approach you and say this has to be a movie? And then what was that whole process like? Like turning it into one?
It was awful. Everything about Hollywood is terrible. No, I mean, it was the worst. So yeah, of course, like if any book, any story that does well, Hollywood always comes calling. And it was just everything about it was terrible, and I hated it. But it was like at the time in my head, like I had to have a movie done of this and whatever. And so I went out to Hollywood and I got it done. Like I got the movie finished and it got released and all that stuff happened. But it was just. I lived in LA for 2 years, and I don't think I've hated anywhere more than LA as a place. There's no industry that I know of that's worse than the entertainment industry. Maybe like the mining industry is worse, like where they have like actual slaves and they, chop off like, kids' arms and like blood diamonds and stuff. Like that industry is maybe worse than Hollywood. I haven't worked in it, but that's the only one I can think of that's worse. I hated every aspect of it to the point where, like, when I was done with my last obligation for my movie, I left, like, from there. Like, I left to the minute I could leave LA.
Oh, wow. So that was based on your experience. Do you think everyone has that experience, though?
If you have a soul, you do. Yeah. I mean, everyone I know who loves Hollywood and who has good experiences out there are either shallow or soulless, one or the other. And like my favorite part is like everyone's starting to figure this out now. Like the whole Weinstein thing broke, and now it's like everyone's realizing that like half of Hollywood are like monsters. And
it's
I'm like,
so crazy, like all of that's coming out. And what's so sad is like how many things were acceptable and just the norm until finally somebody said something.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's funny is I knew this and I said something when I was there. No one, well, I'm not a woman, right? And I'm definitely not even an attractive woman. And I'm not even really even an attractive man. So it's like no one was really sexually harassing me, right? So thankfully I didn't have to deal with that. But that's the thing with terrible people. It's like they're not just terrible at one thing. They're terrible at everything. Like Harvey Weinstein fucked everybody. And I don't mean literally. Like he assaulted and raped a lot of women, but he would also screw you in deals. And like not just a little bit. Like he was a monster. I'll tell you a story about Harvey, like a business story. And it doesn't compare obviously to like physically assaulting someone, but just to give you an idea of what kind of monster he is. So long story short, there was this story in like the New Yorker about some family in Mexico. It was something about soccer, and it was like an incredibly uplifting, like really amazing story about how some team from some random dirt hovel in Mexico like won some international tournament, like junior kids tournament or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously like a reporter went down there, did the story, wrote it up. It was like a big story in like the New Yorker or New York Magazine, and Harvey bought the rights to the story from the family. And he negotiated a $150,000 deal, right? Which was like all the money in the world. Like the entire village was gonna like, be reformed and all this. Like it was like, I mean, that'd be like you and I making 150 million. It was like this massive sort of amazing thing. And so long story short, the guy who produced the movie, like kind of the guy the intermediary between Harvey and this family is a guy I know. And so the long story short, the family calls this guy one day and says, like kind of their broken English, his name is Brian. Oh, Mr. Brian, like, thank you so much. Like, just so thankful. He's like, yeah, great. It's no problem. What's wrong? He's like, well, we think there was a mistake. Maybe like, we don't want to cause problems. He's like, yeah, what's wrong? It's like, well, the check is for 100,000. And I thought the deal, we said the deal was 150. Like, we're happy with 100 if that's all it is. Like, well, it's still amazing. And Brian's like, no, the deal's 150. I'm sure there's just a mistake. Let me call Harvey. Let me call Weinstein Company. I think because at that time it wasn't Miramax, it was Weinstein Company. And let me get this sorted out. And so he calls up business affairs at Weinstein Company, and the head of business affairs, basically the head lawyer, goes, oh yeah, Harvey said just to cut check for 100 grand. And Brian's like, what are you talking about? Like, the deal's 150. Like, it's clear as day in the contract. Like, one pay. Like, this is not like you're breaking the deal. And the lawyer says, oh, I know. Harvey said that they're just some poor Mexicans, and fuck them. They can sue them if they want the other 50 grand. Yeah, seriously. That's the type of monster he is. But by the way, he's not the worst. Like, he's in the top 10. He's not the worst monster in Hollywood. Like, the story that's gotten way less attention is like, and this is not like a world I saw very much, but I kind of knew enough, and I knew enough of the people to know, like, this is a real thing. Like, you would not believe the pedophilia stuff that goes on in Hollywood.
Oh, no.
You would not believe, the person who talks about this the most is Corey Feldman. And he talked about this on The View, and like, Barbara Walters shamed him and like told him he was lying and all this crazy stuff. And like, thank God, obviously, like, I was not involved in any way in that. I mean, I was in Hollywood as a kid and whatever, but like, I mean, it's a monstrous, terrible place. Like, people think I'm just saying, oh, like shallow actresses and nutty producers. And I'm like, no. It's evil. It's truly an evil place. Now, it doesn't have to be. There's nothing inherently evil about film or whatever. Like there's all kinds of YouTube stars who aren't doing stuff like this,
Right.
It's not video, it's not movies, it's not TV inherently. It's the way the Hollywood system works and the people in it, the way the system rewards people and the people who climb to the top. They're not all monsters, but a huge portion of them are horrific monsters.
Crazy.
Yeah, I know. It's probably not the way you thought that the interview was going to go, but I'll tell you the truth about, like, you ask, I'll tell you.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm glad we get to be honest here. Okay, so then let's talk about like your family background and how it led you to do the things that you did. Like, I hope they serve beer in hell type stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, all right. So when you say, what do you mean family background? Like, I had no family background as a writer. What do you mean? In what way?
No, just like what led you to, because you said, you were doing the typical stuff that 20-year-olds do. But
right.
A lot of
Drinking,
20-year-olds did
hooking
not
up,
do a lot of that stuff. Like, it's
I
not,
mean,
it was
like, I don't know.
not what
I don't know
doing.
I don't know what your experience was like in college and the 4 or 5 years after college. But most of the people I know got drunk, threw up, acted stupid, hooked up, fell down, like all of those things. I just kind of, like, I did a little bit more of that stuff than most people, but not that much, just a little bit more. And then I wrote about it. That was really kind of it. You know what's funny is a lot of people say that. They'll be like, oh, no one does that. Like, that's like half the people will be like, oh, these stories are made up. No one's that crazy. And then like the other half of people will be like, dude, your stories are weak, man. Your best story is My Tuesday. And I hear that all the time from people.
Do you think, like, because I know for fact when I think of like experiences with people, I know, like, I've seen some people at their worst, right? I mean, like you said, just like making a total ass of themselves. And then you see them like a week later and they have no clue. Like, they don't even remember it. It's not even talked about. Like, do you think that there's so many people that have these experiences and just block them out?
I don't know. Yeah, does that exist? Of course. And then for some people, it's just like, I mean, they pretend they don't remember, but they do. Like, I'll give you a great example. There was a study done in England about this. Like, it was done in the 90s, I think. No, it was done in the 2000s. And basically, there was like there's just a random hospital where girls would come in women would come in, I guess a few men, but I think it was actually pretty much all women but one or two, who were like complained about or thought they might have been like roofied, or something they'd put in their drinks at a club, right? And so they would come in, and every girl who came in like, basically showing signs of like extremely drunk, extremely out of it, extremely intoxicated, or sort of, altered in some way. And friends would bring them in, whatever. They, of course, for every single one, they draw blood and they do a full toxicology report. I think it was 250 women or something like that in the study. Do you know how many of those actually had the presence of any sort of date rape drug at all in their system?
Oh my gosh, I'm dying to know.
0.
Oh, 0. I thought you were going to give me a low
0!
percentage.
Not one! Every single one of them was just drunk off their ass. or they had other drugs in their system, right? Like,
Yeah.
party drugs, pot, MDMA, whatever it is, right?
Right.
Literally not one woman had a date rape drug, right? Now, I'm not saying date rape drugs don't exist and some guys don't use them. The point is, in this hospital, and I think it's indicative of a lot of places, the women who were representing, because most of them would come in, their friends would drag them in or whatever, and they'd be like, oh yeah, like, obviously I got roofied because why else would I act like this? They acted like that because they had 3 bottles of wine before they went out, and then they had a bunch of shots and then this and that and whatever, and they didn't want to admit to their friends or to anyone else that they were drunk. I mean, so yeah, does that happen? Absolutely. And do most people pretend things don't happen that they did because they're ashamed or embarrassed? Yeah. I think one of the big reasons my stuff blew up is not just because it was funny, but because I was the first person who stood up with my real face and real name and said, I do this, and wasn't ashamed about it, and didn't act repentant, and didn't pretend, didn't play any of those games. I said, you know what? Like literally, it's like how the book starts. I like to drink. I like to hook up with girls. I like to party and be a jackass sometimes, and it's super fun. And that's what I'm going to do. And I did it. And I think millions of people loved that because they felt, not everybody, but huge numbers of people felt the exact same way. And they loved me because I just admitted what they already knew and did,
So what kind of negative feedback did you get when you did this?
It was like on a much smaller scale, but it was almost the exact same thing as what happened to Eminem. Like, do you remember? Isn't it funny now? You might not be old enough. It's funny now to think about, like, Eminem's almost considered like kind of like old school rapper. Not quite, but he's like it's almost laughable that Eminem would be controversial now.
I know.
But I don't know if you remember at the time, that dude it didn't get more controversial than Eminem.
Yeah, I am still. I love Eminem.
Him. Oh, dude, I think he's one of the most brilliant artists of our generation. Like, he is iconic in so many ways. But like, all that dude did was stood up and told the fucking truth about his life, and that was it. And I did the exact same thing, about my life. Obviously, my life's different than his, so like, I didn't have angry battle raps. I had fun drinking stories, right? We had different lives, but like that's all most artists do. Whether you're a great artist, a popular artist, if you're successful at all at your art, it's almost certainly because you are speaking a truth, right? And it's usually a truth that people feel and believe but won't say. And so the pushback I got was just from angry people who were pissed off that I was speaking a truth that conflicted with their identity or their beliefs. So whether it was the religious right, who thinks that no one should drink or have sex or have fun in their life, or it was the opposite side, like the deeply illiberal social justice warrior types who you're seeing now. Like, they were not as big 10, 15 years ago as they are now. But like, those types are just like they're both fundamentalists. One is fundamentalist on the left and one is fundamentalist on the right. And a fundamentalist at its core, they only accept people who believe the exact same thing they do. They are deeply tribalistic. And anyone who stands up and says, fuck you, they freak out about and try and shame and put down all that sort of shit. And yeah, so I went through the exact same thing Eminem did, just on a much smaller scale, because I was nowhere near as big as he was.
So obviously for some people, maybe it didn't for you because you were like, I'm just going to tell my story. But for some people, they will hear something like this and they're just like, well, I need to find the courage to actually share because I have some, crazy stuff that's happened or whatever it is, but they're scared because of what the feedback might be.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I
No,
was just going to say, like,
what's the question?
What do you think, like, what's the difference? Like, did you have any fear, like, in putting that stuff out? Were you just like, I really don't care what anybody thinks? Which is, a lot of people are like that. But I think on some level, everybody has a little bit of, I care what people think,
So yes and no, right? So here's the thing. There are people who literally don't care what anyone thinks. They're called sociopaths. They don't feel emotion. They don't connect with other people, right? So if someone literally, truly, in the most literal sense, does not care, that means they're a sociopath, and that usually means they're dangerous. Doesn't necessarily mean they're violent. That's a psychopath, but they can be dangerous, right? So now, like, when most people say, I don't care what anyone thinks, what they mean is, I don't care what you think or what those people think, right? Yeah. And so I definitely fall into that category. But like the circle of people for whom, or whose opinions I care about is very small and very close to me. And I think that is like kind of the main difference between me or anyone who's willing to kind of speak their truth and people who aren't, is like, I don't even want to say necessarily it's small. It's just like, I care a lot what my wife thinks, right? I care a lot what my friends think. Like the people I know and respect, if they tell me, dude, you're fucking up, then I'm going to listen to that. But if some jackass at the New York Times, who's a total loser in his real life, is basically just a fraud, if they have some opinion about me, either good or bad, like it doesn't move the needle for me. If they like me, okay, fine, that's cool. If they don't, I could give a flying crap. Like, why would I? I mean, like, it doesn't even occur to me to think about the opinions either of people I don't know, but definitely not people I don't respect. If someone I didn't know but really respected had negative things to say about me, yeah, that might give me pause. I might think about it. Like it kind of depends on what they said and in what context and whatever. But I think a lot of people essentially internalize the scripts and beliefs of other people. Well, they'll. Have you ever heard someone say, "Well, I don't want to do that. What will people think?" And then I'm always like, "Well, what people?" Like, well, people. And then like you keep pressing them, and either they can't name people, or they'll name specific people.
It'll be like
right?
Three specific people.
They'll know, well, my mom. Okay, and then like you break it down and you realize like it's actually not like it's not people at large, or if it is, they don't believe that. That's just a thought that's put in their head by somebody else. Like, well, my mom always said, you got to keep up with the Joneses or whatever the hell like nonsense it is. And like, so like that's, I think the problem with most people is that they've internalized those narratives that other people have put on them that are basically telling them what they think they should do, as opposed to sort of owning their own truth and deciding for themselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, and I like that too. I like the clarity on, I don't care what people think. I like clearing that up, because we do care, and there's levels of, like you said, you care about what your spouse thinks. There's certain people, of course, you care what they think, but there's definitely others that are not going to move the needle. Okay, I want to talk about, because I think this is so super cool, and I know our listeners are going to be excited about this if they don't already know about it, but I want to talk about Book in a Box and how you actually came to decided this, you were going to put this together.
Right. So basically I was at I was at an entrepreneur dinner is what it was. And this woman came up to me and she's like, I've had this book in my head for 10 years. People keep asking me to write it. I don't have time. I don't like writing. Like, how can I get this thing out of my head without having to go through the normal process? And I kind of look at her. I'm like, did you just ask me how to write a book without writing it? And she's like, yeah, like I kind of did. And so, I laughed at her. I'm like, well, like that's impossible. Like the word write is literally in the word's in the word. Like write is in the word. You've got to write to write a book. You can't avoid that step. And so then I started like lecturing her about hard work. Like, yeah, everyone says they want a book. No one wants to sit down and do it. And all the bullshit that like snobby elitist writers say, right? And what was funny is she kind of rolled her eyes at me. She said, Tucker, are you an entrepreneur? Because this is an entrepreneurial dinner, so I assume that you're an entrepreneur. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course. And she's like, I don't know. I'm not sure, though, because you keep lecturing me about hard work instead of helping me solve my problem. And I was like, fuck, because she was totally right. She was 100% right. Like I was being a jackass. And so I became obsessed with this problem. Like, how do I solve a problem? Or how do I get this book out of her head without her having to sit down and bang away at a computer for a year? And then it hit me. I was like, oh, of course. Like scribes. Like people have been doing this for thousands of years. Socrates never wrote a word down. Jesus never wrote a word down. Marco Polo was, as far as we know, illiterate. Buddha never wrote anything down. But we have all of their works. How do we have them? Because of scribes. So it's obviously possible for someone to talk and get that work into a book. And so I got a whiteboard and I wrote down every single step it would take to write a book, like everything it took. And I realized I didn't actually need her unless like we were doing content. Like obviously that's the most important part of the book, but there's a huge amount of work that is independent of content. And so I called her up. I'm like, Melissa, here's what we can do. Every time I need ideas and content, I'm going to come to you because I don't know anything. Her field is like pop-up retail, right? And I'm like, I don't know anything about it, and I'm not going to ghostwrite this book. Like, I'm not just going to make stuff up and do research on my own. Like, it's got to be in your voice, which is what she wanted too. She wanted it to be in her voice, and I'm like, that's great. So we'll do that, but like, you just got to be on the phone. And she's like, okay, great. I'll interview you. So I didn't think it was going to work. I'll be honest, but it did, and it worked amazingly. And so. But here's how dumb I was. I didn't even realize it was a company. I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool project. Like, that's interesting. And then, like, let's go do something else. And then she started referring people to me. And not like people who were like, oh, that's a cool idea. And then, like, went on their merry way. These are people who literally cut me checks. And I'm like, what are you cutting me a check for? I don't even have a company. They're like, well, just do for me what you did for Melissa. And then I went on this podcast. I went on Lewis Howes' podcast, actually. And I we didn't even talk. It wasn't even about this. It was about something else. And Lewis is dyslexic, and so we talked about sort of like this process, and he thought it was so cool. And he's like, "Oh man, that's awesome! Like, what do you call it?" I didn't even have a name. Like the guy who'd been helping me, Zach Obrun, who became my co-founder, and I like jokingly called it Book in a Box. So that's what I said on the podcast. And Lewis is like, oh, you should go check it out. Like, go get your book done this way, whatever. And I didn't really honestly think twice about it. And then the next day, I get an email from somebody who's like, hey, I can't find this Book in a Box online. I want to check this out and sign up. Where do I do it? And I was like, and I knew the podcast wasn't out, right? And I was like, what? I'm like, who the hell is this? What is it? He's like, oh, sorry, man. I'm Lewis's podcast producer. And that's when I was like, Zach, we might have like a big thing here. And Zach's like, well, no shit, dude. I've been telling you this for months. And so we put up like this kind of janky landing page and ended up doing $200,000 worth of business in 2 months.
Wow.
And I know exactly, right? And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So like, this is a big deal. And so then like we kind of committed full on to this. That was almost exactly 3 years ago. Since then, we've done 600 books. We've got 30 full-time employees now. We've got 150 freelancers we work with. It's a real company now.
That's so rad. I love that. Well, I used to be a ghostwriter, so I super appreciate the way that you've done everything. But about how long Eric and I have had the Draw Shop for, I guess, 8 years almost.
Yeah.
And before that, I was ghostwriting. And it's funny because he was saying how your process is similar to our process when we, do videos for people. I mean, obviously there's one's coming out with the video, one's coming out with the book. But like in terms of like the simple way of just like outlining it in the different phases, I love that. And I think that's what excites people. especially when I look at your site, it's so cleanly done and it's so clear, like what's going to happen when you sign up. And I love that. So I applaud you for that.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah.
So, how have you managed, like, have you had bumps in the road in terms of, I mean, it's pretty fast growth, right? Over 3 years. How have you managed that? Have things significantly changed outside of just growing and adding more people, or have things happened where you, oh my gosh, we have to totally redo the way we, onboard clients or whatever it is? Like, have things drastically changed, or do you feel like it's kind of been steady?
I wish it had been steady. No, it's been a complete, like, rocket ship's not even the right word. So we really took off somewhere around like the 1 year anniversary, like the 12 to 18 month period. We took off and like added like 100 clients in like, I don't know, 6 months or something. It was fucking bonkers. And we were equipped to do like, 5 a month, and we were now doing like 20 a month or something. And it basically pretty much broke the company. And so we actually had to bring on a full-time CEO and like a serious professional. This dude is a baller CEO. And like, we got really lucky because he was a client of ours. Like, I have no idea how I would have found this, like a baller like this if I had to go out and do it, like, and find this person. Like, I'm not sure what I would have done. But he was a client and he was doing a book with us and he loved our process. But like, and I kind of had joked, this guy at the time was CEO of like $100 million software company. And he didn't, or he's president of it. He didn't start it, but he was the guy who scaled it. Like, he took it from nothing to like $2 million to 100 million. And so like, I was joking with him, like, man, you got to help me with this CEO thing. Like, I'm not very good at it. You seem to be really good at it. So he's like, oh, dude, I'm happy to give you advice. And he's like, I'll tell you what, every time I have any sort of touch point with your company, I'm going to call you up. I'm going to tell you what I think, give you my feedback. I'm like, that's amazing. And so like, he was serious. Every time we did anything, he would call me and he'd be like, okay, here's 3 things you did right. They were fantastic. Now here's the 20 things you could have done better. And like, just would destroy us. But it was like, not in a mean way. He was 100% right. Everything he said was right. And so it was so frustrating. And long story short, basically, I offered him a nice chunk of the company, and I kind of laid out the vision. Here's, like, we're not there now, but here's where we can get. And he was super excited by it. He loved it. Gave him a chunk of the company, and I stepped aside for him. Like, I left the CEO position. Zach ended up leaving the COO position, and JT, is our CEO, brought in sort of his own people. And now, like, that's basically why we scaled. We'd done like 2.5 million before he came on board. 2.5 million in 18 months, which is like, it's pretty good, pretty solid for the first 18 months. Since then, we've done like, I think 12, and it's been about 18 months. Like, so he 5x the company or more, 6x the company or something in basically the same amount of time. Yeah. He's pretty amazing.
Well, it's so cool because he went through the process with you, so he knew what it was all about. It is hard to find people like that. So like you said, how would you have found him? It's so cool that he was a client.
Like, I have no idea. I really don't know. Like, I don't ever give advice for things that I have not experienced and done. And so I stepped aside. I could talk about the emotional process of stepping aside as CEO for your own company, because I did that. But like, I didn't go on a search. In fact, we actually hired a GM for the company before we hired JT, and she was a total disaster. I hired the direct opposite person I should have hired. And like, so like, you should basically take everything I would tell you about how to find and hire this person and do the fucking opposite. It was terrible what we did. Like, when we went on a hiring search, like, we had to fire her in like 2-3 months. Like, she was the complete wrong person for the company.
So who's the best type of client for you guys? Like, who's the best candidate for Book in a Box?
It's pretty simple. Like, someone who knows what they're talking about, right? Like, they're a professional. They're a knowledge worker, a coach, a consultant, a CEO, a high-level executive, an entrepreneur, any sort of thought leader type, right? Like, you teach or you do things for people that are difficult and hard People come to you for advice. You know what you're talking about, and you just want to get that into a book. Like we are essentially a pure knowledge extraction service. Like we get it out of your head, we structure it into a book, we make sure it's exactly what you need to get the results you want. We get all your knowledge and ideas out of your head, and we put it into a book that is your words, your ideas in your words, and even your voice, right? So we only charge $25,000 for this. So we're not, I'm not writing your book for you. Like it's not my ideas and my content and my sort of wording or anything like that. We do have a higher end service that's usually $50,000 to $75,000, where it's much more of a co-creator, and we can kind of help you develop the ideas and flesh them out and whatever. But that's a small minority of our clients. The vast majority of our clients are people who, someone like Eric, like he knows what he's talking about. He doesn't need any help developing his ideas. He just doesn't want to have to sit down and spend a year writing a book. He doesn't want to be frustrated with the process of doing a book. And he wants some professionals to make sure his book is exactly what a book should be. And his knowledge is in a book exactly right and looks as good as it could.
And do you guys do the design of the book and the layout, the complete thing? Awesome.
Everything. Full service book publishing. So you come to us as long as you have your idea and you have the money and there's a clear ROI for you. You're trying to get something, whether it's, speaking gigs or, credibility or authority or thought leadership or leads for your company or what, even you're just trying to share this stuff to help people and maybe everything else is cream. That's fine too. But as long as you have those three things, clear idea, money to pay, and a clear ROI, we take you the entire rest of the way to a fully published, distributed book out in the world that anyone can buy at any bookstore.
That is so awesome. Because I know it can cost, just to get a draft of a book, it can cost nearly $20,000 with a really good ghostwriter. So,
well, what ghostwriter are you working with that charges $20,000? Way more than that. If you charge $20,000, you were way too cheap. A good one is at least $50,000. They're usually $75,000.
They are.
Oh
absolutely.
yeah, $75,000 to $100,000 if they're good.
That is usually the norm. But I'm saying, for some people just to do, so that's why it's like $25,000. That's like, what? That's awesome. Well, this is so cool. So, okay, everyone can check that out at bookinabox.com, correct?
Yes, bookinabox.com.
The site is super awesome. I love it. I love sites like that. I love it when you don't have to you look at it and all your questions are answered, that's just good marketing.
I'm glad you say that, man. It took us a long time to get this site this way. It was not easy.
Yeah. And I mean, it's the same with putting out a book. People do have a lot of information and they're clear in their head, but some people it's just hard to get it out, organize it, and figure out the outline of how it should go. So to be able to have a team like yours on your side. But I just think it's so awesome that it's from beginning, concept of here's what I want it to do to the very end of here's your printed book. That's awesome. So cool.
Yeah, that's what people want, man. They don't want to have to deal with it. They just want to get their knowledge out of their head. They just want to get on the phone and then have the book show up. That's exactly them. Yep.
Well, you're so cool, and I'm so excited that you were on the show with me, and I can't wait to hear the interview that you did with Eric too. That was for one of our other ventures, but yeah, you're just cool in so many ways. I remember back in the day watching the movie, reading the book, going, this is awesome. And I totally applauded your just realness. So thank you for that. And thank you for today.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's Get Genius. You can learn more about The Draw Shop at www.thedrawshop.com, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Your home for kick-butt custom whiteboard marketing videos. Your ideas come to life. Thanks for listening. Please share, comment, and make any suggestions for future Genius guests.